Hello everyone and welcome to the channel or welcome back to the channel. What I wanted to do in this video is share some of the things that I've learned about trapping an active farm for what's commonly referred to as nest predators, raccoons, skunks, and possums. I'm by no means a professional trapper, but I'm a pretty quick study of what does and doesn't work. And I also wanted to learn from those of you who are more, let's say, professional trappers. So I'm looking forward to any constructive criticisms in the comments, tips and tricks that you guys have also. So when I say active farm, I mean a farm that's got some livestock, dogs, and cats, whether those cats be feral or some of the local farm pets. The livestock and dogs I don't need to worry about because I use either live traps or dog-proof traps, but cats are something that definitely have to be considered. Let's talk live traps first. There are advantages and disadvantages to live traps. The biggest advantage that everyone agrees on is if you catch an animal that you're not after, you can easily release it. Disadvantages, there's a few that I can think of right offhand. One is the price tag. It's February 2024 right now, and I can go online and see these anywhere from $30 to $130. I think I've seen them upwards of $150 depending on the quality of the trap and where you get it from. Another disadvantage is if you catch a rather large raccoon and you dispatch it in the trap. I've had them tear these things up pretty good. They've bent the trigger mechanisms or the trip pan. Another disadvantage is catching skunks. One thing I learned this past year is if you have scraps of fried chicken, don't use it to attempt to catch raccoons because 9 times out of 10 you'll end up catching a skunk instead. There's some pretty crazy videos online of people dispatching skunks without getting sprayed. The craziest I think I've seen is a guy who attaches a 100-foot length of rope to the trap. He pulls the trap out of the area, up a ramp, and into a kiddie pool full of water. I don't go to elaborate lengths like that. I just dispatch them in the trap. And then I hope for rain over the course of the next week or so to get rid of some of that scent. But you can expect that that scent's going to stay on that trap for a couple of months no matter how good you wash it. Another benefit to live traps is if you have destructive woodchucks in your area. These traps work great for woodchucks. I never really knew a good bait for them until this past year. I found out from a cousin that stinging nettles, or as we call it, fireweed, works really well as bait for woodchucks. They love the tops of these, so if you just cut the tops of some of this fireweed off and put it in the back of the live trap, it's a really good way to catch them. So let's talk dog-proof traps. To my knowledge, there's just currently 2 varieties of this. The first is the pull only, and the second is the push-pull. And that's describing the trigger mechanism. So the pull only is designed to have the tab that retains the spring mechanism, which is called the dog. That dog sits in a notch on the back of the trigger mechanism. And this, because of the design of that smaller dog, requires a set tool. I don't like having to carry around a set tool, and for that reason, I like the push-pull variety, which enables the manufacturer to put a little bit more of a lever on that dog. So you can use that lever to compress the spring, and then in that lever is a cutout with 2 teeth. And those 2 teeth match up with 2 more teeth on the trigger mechanism. This also makes this trap quite a bit more sensitive. The obvious benefits to a pull only are that a raccoon is pretty much the only animal that's going to stick his, let's say, paw in the trap and be able to pull the mechanism. So a push-pull trap is kind of indiscriminate, because a barnyard cat or a skunk or a possum can stick their paw in and push to trigger this. So with that in mind, you have to be selective on the baits that you use for a push-pull mechanism. A pull mechanism only, you can put whatever you think a raccoon might like, and odds are the only thing that's going to be able to set that is a raccoon. But the push-pull, again, if you put something in that trap that, cat food, for instance, any animal's going to want to try to get a hold of that, and a cat can easily trigger this. With that being said, if you are in an area where you don't have to worry about cats, I've found that cat food works about the best, whether it's a hard cat food soaked in salmon oil, a soft fish-based cat food, or even better yet, a cheap can of sardines. But what I do to avoid the cats on the farm, since I know raccoons love cracked corn, I've resorted to using cracked corn, and I mix it with maple syrup, and that also attracts the skunks and the possums. But if you get them in the dog-proof trap, it's not as big of a deal worrying about them spraying and messing up your live trap. Let's talk set locations. Here in the middle in the circle, this is an area that I like to monitor the deer and the pheasants on the farm using my trail camera. I also call it the robbery location because this is where the masked bandits make off with a ton of corn every single night. This creek bottom is kind of a highway for the wildlife on the farm, but coming into and going out of this particular feeder location, there's one main trail to the south, and then there's another split trail going off to the north. So the locations that have done the best for me are on the trails, probably a minimum distance away from the feeder of about 20 yards. So 20 yards out to 150 yards or even 200 yards from the feeder. Obviously, the closer you get to the feeder, the more of these trails are going to come together and it's going to be the highest traffic. But as soon as they get really close to the feeder, that's the only thing they're concentrating on, and they could care less about your traps or what you've got for bait in the traps at that point. However, I will say that I have done fairly well right next to the feeder, but only after I've let the feeder run dry and haven't filled it for a day or two. It looks like we got one of the big fat ones. He's been getting fat on cracked corn and sugar beets. I think that's the only one. Double check the other traps, but I think he's the only one. So I'll get him taken care of.